As always, this is going to be a brutally honest MMO tier list. Let me know if you agree with the rankings. I've made some big changes to this tier list based on the decisions of the developers over the last year as we head into 2025. The first game we're going to talk about, and one that you're probably very familiar with, is WoW Classic. This is also going to be the first game I knocked down a peg, thanks to some of the decisions the developers have made over the last year. Launched in 2019, WoW Classic is a relaunch of the original game. It's a classic take on the MMO experience. Minimal cash shop, gear is earned in-game, weapon cosmetics can be earned in-game, mounts can be earned in-game. It's everything I could hope for in an MMO. Last year I put it in S tier because Blizzard had just announced Classic's next expansion. They added Hardcore as well as Self-Found, and they added Season of Discovery. WoW Classic was thriving. The problem is that Season 2 and 3 of Season of Discovery provided a twist that I didn't like at all. They turned WoW Classic into retail WoW by focusing on getting everyone into the same endgame raid to run over and over. This removed everything I loved about Classic, which was leveling from zone to zone, experiencing new enemies, new quests, and new dungeons along the way. All of that was replaced by raid logging. And beyond that, I'm just not sure how many times I can return back to WoW Classic to repeat that same content over and over again. It was really fun the first couple of times, but now I'm starting to grow weary of it. So I'm going to be dropping WoW Classic down to B tier for now. Next up, an MMO that was briefly fantastic in its time. That's going to be AION. Launched in the East in 2009 and in the West in 2010. It saw great success in Korea, but it just couldn't seem to retain its players here in the West. It went free to play in 2012, and with that change came pay for convenience and pay to win transactions. This game was so unique when it launched. It was gorgeous, and gliding around the zones was a ton of fun. But for me, ultimately, I found it to be just a little bit too grindy, and I eventually lost interest. I suspect this is what happened for much of the Western audience. During its launch, I probably would have put it into A or B tier, but right now it's a shell of its former self. It might be fun to go back and play for the nostalgia, but it's not the game that it used to be, and for that reason, I'm gonna have to put it in the C tier. Next up is ALBION Online. This MMO is doing something that a lot of MMOs aren't doing right now. Its population is actually still growing. ALBION Online is a free-to-play MMORPG launched in 2017, and it's done a great job of maintaining and growing its player base. It's a classless MMO in which the gear you wear determines the abilities that you use. It's got a massive passive tree to work your way through, and this is definitely the best full-loot PvP MMO available if you're looking for one. It's on a fantastic trajectory right now with 5 years of player growth, and it keeps getting better. But my biggest gripe with this one is that you can walk up to the shop and buy the best gear in the game with cold hard cash. That kind of pay for power in a PvP game just doesn't jive so well with me. So I'm gonna knock it down to B tier this year. If you're a PvP main, I can easily see you putting it in the A tier, and if you're a PvE main, I can easily see you putting it a lot lower than that. Next up, we have ARCHEAGE, which launched in Korea in 2013 and launched in the West in 2014. But first, now if you're burnt out on all the games on this tier list, maybe it's time to try something different, like a game that's having a crossover you've always dreamed of. Shout out to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring the video, and thanks to Universal Studios licensing. He-Man and Skeletor are joining the fray as legendary heroes, so grab your nostalgia and head into battle. He-Man needs no introduction. He's a mighty warrior, enhancing his own attack before destroying any evil that stands before him. He-Man absolutely takes me back to my childhood. Skeletor is a nefarious trickster who can seal his enemies in stone. Everyone can get the legendary champion Skeletor for free by logging into Raid for 7 days between November 25th and January 8th. You get Skeletor on day 7 and bonus rewards the next days after that. Make sure you start by December 25th to get Skeletor. On top of that, players can complete the Champion Pass to get the legendary champion He-Man. If you haven't started playing yet, then what are you waiting for? Click my link in the description or scan my QR code on screen to get insane bonuses available only via my link. On sign up, you will immediately get a huge starter pack with Epic Champion Tagoar from the Orc faction. At level 15, you'll get another starter pack with Epic Champion Uugo. And after downloading using my link, be sure to use promo code Monkey King to get the legendary champion Sun Wukong for free. Once you get into the game, join Clan Vegeta Best Arc 8888, and I'll see you on the battlefield. Shout out to Raid for supporting this channel. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the video. ARCHEAGE is a sand park MMORPG, which was known for featuring a massive explorable ocean, a crime and punishment system, and a combo-based tab targeting system. It launched really well, but they completely failed to prevent cheaters, and then oftentimes the people that weren't cheating were multi-boxing and abusing the labor system. It was an MMO that had so much wasted potential. ARCHEAGE 2 has been announced, but they said that that game's going to be moving away from its PvP focus and towards a PvE focus, so it sounds like it's going to be a completely different game. But back to ARCHEAGE 1, this is a game that had a ton of potential potential, but it's fallen short of that potential thanks to not properly managing its player base and making the game way too pay to win. So for me, the best thing I can do with this one is maybe return for a week for some nostalgia, and so for that reason I'm gonna have to put it into the C tier. Next up we have ASHERON'S Call, one of the first 3D MMOs releasing all the way back in 1999. While it wasn't as popular as EVERQUEST, it still had a huge and loyal fan base. It had a massive, seamless open world half a decade before WoW would release. It could support massive amounts of players on screen at once, and it offered an impressive draw distance for the time. The servers kept their lights on for a long time too. Eventually the game went free to play in 2014 before finally shutting down its official servers in 2017. You can still play this game on private servers, but it's definitely not getting any more updates, and you're not likely to encounter a lot of players while doing so. Still, if you want to boot it up and take a brief trip down memory lane, the ability is there, but I think the trip would be very brief given the current state of the game, and so the best I can do for this one is put it into the C tier, because it was a good game once upon a time, so it might be fun to revisit for a week, but not more than that. Next up, we've got Blade & Soul, which released here in the West in 2016. In its prime, it was a great game with great combat, although way too instanced for my personal taste. There were way too many small zones for it to feel like a true open world MMO. The more load screens I experience in an MMO, the less it feels like an MMO. But like I said, the combat was great and the game was gorgeous in its time. But today it would be accurate to describe it as an almost dead pay to win MMO. And so for that reason, the best I can do is put this one into C tier. Next up we have Bless Unleashed, which released in 2020. They keep remaking this game and they keep re-releasing it, but it never survives. Is it the pay to win? Is it the lack of depth? Maybe it's all of the above. There just seems to be a lot missing from Bless Unleashed and its predecessors, and it might be time to make something entirely new. As a result of all of this, Bless Unleashed has now shut down entirely. This game wasn't received very well when it was launched, it was pay to win, and then it was shut down, and so for all of these reasons, this one's gonna be the first game to go into the F tier. Next, we've got a brand new MMO. This one just released here in late 2024, and it's called Brighter Shores. So far, this one has been really well received. If you like RuneScape or you like old school RuneScape, there's a very solid chance you'll like Brighter Shores. It's no coincidence that the guy who made RuneScape also made Brighter Shores. As such, it's shaping up to be a solid entry as a RuneScape-like, with a big focus on skilling, capes, and questing. The game is in early access, and it's a long way from being complete, so the best I can do is put it into B tier for now, but I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on this one. Next up, we've got Black Desert Online. This was launched back in 2015 and is still one of the most beautiful MMOs around. It's often praised for its combat and its graphics, with the primary downside of this MMO being a significant lack of group content for the players who enjoy that. Recent expansions have tried to add a lot of great PvE content for the players who are looking to do more outside of the PvP side of things. In recent years, the game changed publishers, and as a result of this, we saw a lot of things that were overtly pay to win removed from the game. It's also added a lot of quality of life into the game that you previously had to pay for. So the monetization of Black Desert Online has gotten a lot better and has successfully moved itself farther away from what it was known for before, where it had a really bad reputation of being pay to win, but there is still a very direct path to pay for power in this MMO that there isn't in some other MMOs. And for that reason, I'll put this one into the B tier. Although if you're a PvP main, I can easily see you slamming this one into A tier. Next up, we have a big one, Dark Age of Camelot. This was the first open world PvP MMO for a lot of players, and it was one of the first MMOs to do open world PvP right. Dark Age of Camelot left a mark on the MMO genre more visible than almost any other MMO around. Its tri-faction open-world siege warfare system was so popular that it was the foundation for PvP in massive MMOs like Elder Scrolls Online, Warhammer Online, and Guild Wars 2. You can still play DAOC today. It still boasts a small but loyal player base. It's a long way from its prime, but it might be fun to go back and play for a week for the nostalgia, and for that reason, I can go ahead and toss this one into the C tier. Next up, we have DC Universe Online. This one was launched all the way back in 2011. I have yet to get into any superhero MMOs. I'm not sure why, but they've never called to me like the fantasy and the sci-fi MMOs have. I do recognize that a good number of people did enjoy this game, however, and some still continue to enjoy it today. And for that reason, the servers are actually still up and running. So I'll go ahead and put this one into the C tier. It's not my cup of tea, but it is still going, and there was a lot of people that enjoyed this one. Next up, we have Dungeons & Dragons Online, released back in 2006. This is one of the only MMOs really trying to give you that deep D&D experience in your MMO. You actually have a D&D narrator narrating your journey as you make your way through dungeons. This game does so much right, but the problem is that it does at least that much wrong. Namely, the monetization. It's now free to play, and so they've elected to monetize it in all the worst ways possible. You want to buy skills? Sure. You want to buy levels? You bet. Didn't like the loot you got? You can even re-roll the loot that the boss drops by paying real hard cash. Gross. It's too bad, really. There's a half-decent MMO experience under there somewhere, but it's hard to find between the neglect and the over-monetization. Still, if you're desperate for a free-to-play MMO to distract you for a week, this one could be one of the better ones to go back and play. For that reason, I'll go ahead and put Dungeons & Dragons into the C tier. Next up, did you hear that? Oh, that was just ELYON entering the scene. Nothing has really changed for this one. It launched pay to win, and unfortunately for it, it wasn't good enough for players to want to spend time in the world in spite of that. It launched fairly recently, and it launched in Unreal Engine 3, when modern MMOs were launching in Unreal Engine 5, so the graphics were dated at best. But most damning of all is that no one is playing the game anymore. The cash shop was full of create a problem to sell you the solution, and they didn't do a good job of disguising that. The combat was actually decent, and as always, I can't help but wonder what kind of success it might have had if they focused on creating a good experience instead of getting you to open your wallet. Unfortunately for ELYON, they didn't do that, and so the game was shut down in less than a year in the West, and then it was shut down everywhere else in 2023. This MMO is a spectacular cautionary tale of what happens when your MMO is too pay to win, and for all of those reasons, we're going to go ahead and place this one into the F tier. Next up, we have Elder Scrolls Online, launched in 2014. ESO is a solid MMO and one of the better ones that you can play without a sub. It's got incredible dungeons, amazing voice acting, and a lot of stuff that you'll love from the Elder Scrolls franchise. The game features an action combat system and the Holy Trinity. Its biggest strength is probably that ESO is one of the only MMOs that doesn't require a sub, while also being one of the least pay-to-win MMOs on the list. It's also one of the only MMOs still pushing loot crates, unfortunately. But if you're looking for something with a strong story focus, amazing voice acting, that doesn't require a subscription to try it out, and isn't pay-to-win, well, then there's not a lot of better options out there. And for that reason, we're gonna go ahead and put ESO into the A tier. Next up, we have EVE Online. This MMO has the most expensive subscription at $20 a month. EVE Online launched all the way back in 2003 and is still getting tons of support from its developers 2 decades after its launch. It recently saw its new player experience get overhauled, drastically improving the first few hours of the game for new players. A lot of people absolutely love this game and have spent tons of time in it, and while I have thoroughly enjoyed my time playing it, it does not check a lot of the boxes that I personally want to check when I'm playing an MMO. It lacks your typical dungeons and raids, and the Holy Trinity with DPS, tanks, and healers. It's spaceships in space, which is amazing, but being that it lacks all of my favorite MMO content, and it's getting really old now, I'm gonna have to go ahead and move this one down to C tier this year. Next up, we have EverQuest, launched all the way back in 1999. This is one of the oldest MMOs. Still, it has a small but respectable population today. It's an absolute classic. It's one of the forefathers of the MMO genre. Before WoW, when no one knew what an MMO was, EverQuest was forging the path. It was the king of the genre in its prime, but it's old now and has long since handed over the crown. It probably doesn't put out enough content to be your main MMO these days, and for that reason, I'll go ahead and put this one in the C tier. Next up, we have Final Fantasy XI. This was one of my favorite MMOs when it first launched. Sadly, last year they announced that the game would enter maintenance mode. Servers are going to be kept up, but support moving forward is going to be incredibly limited. When it launched in 2002, the game was brutal. If someone in the group accidentally pulled one extra mob, that was it. They had effectively cost the group hours of experience, the XP loss on death, the arduous journey back to your group's grinding spot. Final Fantasy XI was unforgiving and insanely fun back in its prime. Today, it's a lot more forgiving and a lot more casual, and really nothing like it used to be. Its servers are still running, and it still boasts a decent player base, but for the vast majority of players out there, it's been long replaced by Final Fantasy XIV. However, unlike many of the old MMOs on this list that were kept alive long after their prime, Final Fantasy XIV did not engage in predatory and pay-to-win monetization. It's still, to this day, a sub-to-play MMO with no cash shop. Absolutely amazing. I wish we saw more MMOs age this gracefully. I previously had this MMO in the B tier, but now that it's entered maintenance mode, I'm gonna go ahead and drop it down to C tier. Thanks to the fact that it's not getting new content, it's probably something you can go back and play for fun, for nostalgia's sake, but not something that you're gonna actively play as your main game for very long. Next up, we have EverQuest 2. I remember this game's launch like it was yesterday. I went over to my friend's house to have a LAN party for the launch of this one. EverQuest 2 was supposed to be the next big MMO when it came out. It was the successor successor to EverQuest, which was the most popular MMO out at the time. It had everything going for it. There was just one problem: a new challenger entered the battlefield. Blizzard would release World of Warcraft just 2 weeks after EverQuest 2 launched. As a result, EverQuest never got the years of polish and improvement that it would have needed to be a competitive MMO today. At the launch, this one was a buggy mess. I don't think any of me or my friends played it for more than a week or two. So I would say this game didn't fail because WoW came out. I would say that it failed because they tried to release it before WoW came out. It just wasn't ready. The most tragic part of this story is that this wasn't a horrible MMO, it just wasn't as good as WoW. Though it did have some weird ideas, like taking damage while crafting. People literally needed a healer to keep them alive while at the forge. How's EQ doing today? Well, EverQuest 1 has more players than EverQuest 2. I'd largely attribute this to the fact that EverQuest 2 has terrible monetization today. For instance, you can pay real money to resurrect your character in place after you die, or you can pay real money to repair your gear. And that's just the tip of the monetization iceberg. It wasn't an awful game at launch, but it's devolved into an awful game today. And for all of those reasons, I'm gonna have to put EverQuest 2 into the C tier. It's something you could jump in and solo your way through for a bit, but the monetization is eventually going to wear you down. Next up, we have one of the titans, Final Fantasy XIV. Launched almost a decade and a half ago in 2010, it would experience the most spectacular crash and burn the MMO community had ever witnessed. But it wasn't spectacular because it crashed, it was spectacular because it relaunched in 2013 to great success. Final Fantasy XIV has exciting trials, with both the bosses and the stages transforming during the battle, all while an epic soundtrack that was made just for that fight rages on in the background. But it's not just the spectacle that it puts on when you're in boss fights, but it's also a great MMO that treats its players like people. There's no predatory monetization, no loot boxes, no pay to win, no create a problem to sell you the solution. The best mounts are earned in-game, the best weapon cosmetics are earned in-game, houses are bought with in-game gil. The game doesn't even have a cash shop in it. You have to leave the game and open a web browser to view the cash shop. And with the start of this Dawn Trail saga, Final Fantasy XIV isn't slowing down. And whether you like Final Fantasy XIV or not, you've got to admit that it's treating its community the way you wish your MMO would treat you. And for all of those reasons, I'm going to put Final Fantasy XIV into the S tier. It's hands down one of the best MMOs out right now. Next up, we have another classic, Guild Wars 1. Launched all the way back in 2005, Guild Wars 1 was a fantastic MMO in its day, and still has a respectable number of players playing it today. It's definitely showing its age these days, as it's long past its prime, but if you were a fan of the game way back when, it might be fun to revisit for nostalgia's sake. The servers are still up and running, and it holds up reasonably well despite its age, with minimal pay to win. And for those reasons, it still has people playing it today, though not as many as you'd like to make the world feel truly alive. It was a great game in its prime, but today a lot of MMOs are doing what it does better, and for all of those reasons, I'm going to go ahead and put this one into the C tier. It might be fun to visit for the nostalgia, but you probably wouldn't stay there very long. Next up, we have another one of the most popular MMOs on this list, and that's going to be Guild Wars 2. Launched back in 2012, Guild Wars 2 is one of the most underrated games out there. It's free to play with purchasable expansions, so it's incredibly affordable to get into. Unfortunately, that also means a lot of the game's most exciting cosmetic progression is rolled into the cash shop, but not all of it by any means. It's worth noting that in recent expansions, they've added a lot of earnable cosmetics, so this is getting better. Guild Wars 2 by far has the best mount system of any MMO that I've ever played before, and it's not even close. You've got mounts that can fly, mounts that can jump super high, mounts that can go underwater. It's amazing, and that's why WoW stole one of its mounts and put it right into its game with dragon riding. Guild Wars 2 also has some of the best zone design of any MMO I've ever played. The solo content experience is fantastic. The one place I feel like this game lacks is in the group content. The main questline features tons of voice acting for the NPCs and your character as well. Guild Wars 2 is still adding solid expansions and still has a massive player base. There's two things I wish I could change about Guild Wars 2, and that is I wish it had more focus on the trinity of tank, healer, and DPS, and I also wish that it had more earnable mount skins and weapon skins. If it fixed those two things, I could put this game into S tier, but because it won't, it's going to be sitting here in the A tier. Maybe in Guild Wars 3. Next up, one of the first MMOs I fully degened, and that's going to be Lineage 2, which launched back in 2003. Lineage 2 was an amazing game in its prime. It was a gorgeous subscription-based MMO with amazing castle sieges and raids. It was one of the games that inspired Ashes of Creation, and you can still see a lot of its design in Ashes of Creation. At launch, it had no pay to win, but unfortunately today, it's a pay to win mess. A shell of its former self. It could be a fun game to revisit for the nostalgia, but it's no longer getting updates, and it's a pay-to-win mess, and for that reason, the best we can do for Lineage 2 is put it into the C tier. I had a ton of fun with this one way back in the day, but I could never go back now. Next up, we've got Lord of the Rings Online, launched in 2007. Lord of the Rings Online is a classic take on the classic tab targeting MMO. For being a 2007 MMO, it doesn't look half bad. I think the main reason it didn't do better is that it didn't seem to do anything better than all the other tab target MMOs out there, so I never really got into it like I did with so many of the others. I think that if you're looking for something different to try and you're burnt out on all the biggest MMOs right now, there are enough people playing this one to get into it and have some fun for a while. This old dog is still getting updates, it's still reasonably monetized, and it's still got a decent player base. And for all of those reasons, I'm going to go ahead and place it into the B tier. Next up, we have Lost Ark. Is it an MMO or is it a casino? Nobody really knows. Launched in the West in 2022, Lost Ark was almost a fantastic game that I thoroughly enjoyed my time in, but I hit the paywall where you're eventually forced to either buy materials from the cash shop or create alts and do the same dailies every day on all of the alts to grind materials so that you can progress at a reasonable pace. This ends up feeling like a job really fast, and it ruined the experience for me, which is too bad because it had housing, sailing, great zone completion activities, amazing dungeons, and raids. The population of this game is now a fraction of what it was a year ago because I think everybody else is getting tired of the same things that wore me out, and so it seems to be struggling as of late. Until I hit the monetization wall, I was having a lot of fun with this game, and if it wasn't for the excessive pay to win and the excessive over monetization of this game, I could have easily put this one into A tier. But because those problems are there and the population is shrinking at a rapid rate, the best I could do for Lost Ark now is put it into the B tier. The one thing that Lost Ark has going for it is the fact that you can play through this entire game free to play as a free to play player. And there's a lot of free to play games where you can't say that. So if you are someone that's really looking for a truly free to play MMO, it's one of the best out there. Next up, we've got a pretty unique entry, and that's going to be Mortal Online, launched back in 2021. This is a full loot PvP MMO. This game doesn't have a whole lot for you to do as it relies on the players to provide their own content, which can be a lot of fun. Look at RuneScape or Lineage 2, for example. Tons of player-made content and great games in their time. I think if the combat in this game wasn't so janky, this MMO's world could have been a lot of fun for me, but it's got directional mouse-swinging combat that I really just can't get behind. If you play MMOs solely for the PvP and enjoy full loot, you could give this one a try, but between the full loot PvP and the janky combat, this one's just not for me. However, I am going to be raising it from the bottom tier of this tier list up to C tier because they are legitimately trying to make a good MMO here, and they are trying to monetize it fairly, unlike the MMOs that are in the F tier here. So we're bumping this one up to C tier this time. It's a game created for a very specific type of player. That player's just not me. Next up, we've got Neverwinter, released back in 2013. Neverwinter was another great addition to the MMO genre. Even by today's standards, it's still a decent game. But as oftentimes is the case with MMOs, as they age, the monetization has gotten questionable. Many calling this one pay to win. Actually, let's just be honest, this thing is straight up pay to win now. There's no way around it. That's unfortunate because there's a decent MMO under all the monetization. So this one would probably be fun to go back and play for the nostalgia or just to check it out if you never did, but I don't see it being anyone's main MMO in 2024. And for that reason, the best we can do is put this one into the C tier. Next up, we've got New World, which launched back in 2021 and finally became a complete game in 2023. This is a game that I always have a lot of fun with until I run out of things to do, which doesn't tend to take very long. There just wasn't enough PvE content, and there were too many recycled assets ranging from enemies to entire towns. And as a result, New World suffered a pretty rough launch, but has taken the feedback from the community and is committed to doing its best to fix all of the issues with the game. This game is 3 years old now and night and day better than it was at launch. It recently launched on console, so it's one of the few quality MMOs that is on both PC and console, and the content that they've added since launch, like Brimstone Sands, has been amazing. They've now added the ability to swim and mounts, so the game's gotten significantly better over time. The biggest problem with this MMO is the developers have never really known what they wanted it to be. Back from when it started as a PvP survival game to becoming a open world MMO game when it launched, and now they're marketing it as an action RPG. The developers just can't seem to decide on what they want this to be, and that has been the Achilles heel of it this whole time. And as a result, it's never really had enough content because they keep changing what it's supposed to be, and they keep remaking the first part of the game, trying to better align it with what it's going to be marketed as this month. right? So for all of these reasons, I think this is actually one of the best games to go back and play if you never did. It's a really fun journey from 1 to max level. You just might run out of things to do shortly after you hit max level, but you'll have a good time getting there. On the bright side, New World's population is doing substantially better than it was before. And so for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and put it in the B tier with hopes that I can bump it back up to A tier again soon once they start releasing some more endgame content so that people are actually able to stick around this time. Next up, another MMO that needs no introduction, and that's going to be old school RuneScape. Old school RuneScape is certainly one of the titans in the industry and also one of the most unique entries. RuneScape launched all the way back in 2001. It was a browser-based MMO that somehow became one of the most popular MMOs in history. RuneScape was a great game to many, and clearly it did a lot right. But for me personally, I had a computer with a video card, and so I was able to run much more immersive MMOs like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy. So I never actually made the time to play a browser MMO like RuneScape. That's something that I definitely hope to change someday, but with millions of players still logging in and fair monetization, and it's still receiving sizable expansions today, this game is always really tough for me to place on a tier list. I'm always torn about where to place old school RuneScape. There's so much that I love about this game, like the fact that the community gets to vote on everything that's added to the game. This ensures that the game stays well monetized because the community gets the last say on whether something's added or not. On the other hand, look at it. It is hideous by today's standards. Is this really the pinnacle of gaming in 2024? Still, you can't argue with its popularity and its ability to retain its position as one of the most popular MMOs of all time, even today. What it does right, it does so very right. And for that reason, I'll keep old school RuneScape in the S tier for one more year. Next up, we have Rift. This is an MMO that I disproportionately hear people say, I miss that game, right? More so than I hear people say it about so many other more popular games. Rift launched back in 2011 and was a solid entry, but it fizzled out really quickly. It was good, but it wasn't great. And like I mentioned, a lot of people talk really fondly about this game because it did some things well, and it had some really unique systems. But with all the better MMOs out there, players never really made time to make this their main MMO. And for that reason, it struggled. Today, you might be able to revisit Rift for a week or two, but it's unlikely you'd be able to play it as your main MMO. And for that reason, the best I can do is put this one into the C tier. Next up, we have the less popular RuneScape, known as RuneScape 3. RuneScape 3 has an odd combat system that tried to move its animations forward but held onto its old, slow tick rate, making everything feel a little bit disjointed. This and a host of other changes caused many players to go back to what is called old school RuneScape. The monetization of this game, combined with its graphics, is just a bridge too far for me. And the fact is, they released a better version of this game before this game came out, and it's called Old School RuneScape. So for all of these reasons, the best I can do for RuneScape 3 is put it into the C tier. If it had better monetization, I could probably try putting it into the B tier, but as aggressively as this one's monetized, I could never make this one my main MMO. Next up, we've got Star Trek Online, launched back in 2010. You can still play Star Trek Online today. It's always been decent, never amazing, but it's definitely one of the more unique entries in the genre. It's not the most thriving MMO in the world, but you can still enjoy the story content of this MMO today just fine. It's one of the few sci-fi MMOs out today, and it doesn't have a monetization model that's preventing you from enjoying the story content, and for all of those reasons, we're gonna go ahead and place it into the B tier. It's still good enough to jump into and play through the story. Next up, another big MMO, Star Wars: The Old Republic. Star Wars: The Old Republic launched in 2011. It has a fantastic single-player campaign with a great story. It's got Star Wars, it's got lightsabers, and all around was a great addition to the MMO genre. It did ultimately end up really lacking in the group content department when compared to its peers. Previously, I'd lowered SWTOR from A tier to B tier because it felt like the developers were putting the game into maintenance mode, and that was eventually more or less confirmed when they announced that they were handing SWTOR off to another developer to maintain. Still, Star Wars: The Old Republic has some of the best story content of any MMO and pretty fair monetization, and for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and place it into the B tier. This is easily one that you can go back and play or revisit if you've never done it. Next up, we have another old favorite of mine, and that's going to be TERA. TERA launched back in 2011, and it was a gorgeous MMO at the time, best known for its fantastic feeling combat. The game was plagued with a lot of problems, and ultimately it was turned into a game you could hardly recognize. Group content became solo content, leveling became compressed, monetization was cranked through the roof, and updates stopped until it was finally shut down. In its prime, it was an amazing MMO with some really cool ideas and some of the best feeling combat ever released. However, the developers went overboard with monetization and progression and completely ruined the experience, shutting the game down entirely. If you were able to find a private server to play on and you wanted to jump into the game for a little while, it might be fun for a week. And it was a good game, and if you could find like a classic version of this game, it might be a fun time. So for that reason, I'd put it into the C tier. Next up, we have Ultima Online, one of the forefathers of the entire genre. Ultima Online launched all the way back in 1997. It's long past its prime now, but it's definitely left its mark. There are still thousands of players logging in to play it every day, which is insanely impressive when you consider its age. But it's old, it's really old, and it shows both in its gameplay and its graphics. It might be fun to jump into this game for a week or two and just see where it all started, and to be able to see what everyone's talking about when they're reliving their glory days. But it's definitely not a game that I could make my main MMO today, and for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and put Ultima Online into the C tier. Next up, we've got Warhammer Online, launched in 2008. This was a really solid entry into the genre, made by the same guy that made Dark Age of Camelot, and you can see the resemblance between the two. Unfortunately, this game just had too many problems, too many bugs, too many performance issues, and it wasn't able to retain its player base, which sent Warhammer Online to an early grave. You can still play it on private servers for a trip down memory lane, and it's surprisingly not pay to win, which means it's probably more fun to revisit than a lot of the old MMO. But the last time I checked in on it, server performance wasn't great, mob AI was kind of wacky, and so for those reasons, the best I can do is put Warhammer into C tier. It's probably not in good enough shape for you to make it your main MMO today. Next up, we have an MMO you may have heard of, World of Warcraft. Launched in 2004, World of Warcraft is the most successful MMO of all time, with Blizzard boasting that the game had over 10 million concurrent subscribers and over 100 million accounts created all the way back in 2014, with many, many more since then. No MMO comes close to the success that this MMO saw in its prime. While it's far from its prime today, it's still one of the most polished and complete MMOs today, competing for the #1 MMO spot with Final Fantasy XIV and old school RuneScape. It's an old game, and it's been bleeding players for a long time now as a result, but it's hard to dispute the evidence. More people have enjoyed this MMO than any other MMO in the world, and it's just released the first expansion of a 3-expansion saga. In other words, Blizzard is still investing a ton of money into this MMO, making it almost impossible for anybody else to put out as much content with as much polish, and for that reason, this is easily an MMO you could make your main, and it's going to be going into the S tier. Next up, we have Wizard 101, released all the way back in 2008. This is a really unique entry into the genre. In Wizard 101, the combat revolved around collecting decks of cards and using those to fight your way through battles. It has farming, fishing, housing, you name it. It's still got a surprisingly active player base, and it's still getting tons of updates from its developers, making it a game that you could easily dive into and enjoy for a lot of hours if you wanted to. So for that reason, I'll be tossing this one into the B tier. Next up, we've got SKYFORGE, launching in 2015 and dying almost at the same time. It was pay to win and mediocre at launch, and it's pay to win, mediocre, and dead today. It's just a game that wasn't good, and it never got good, and for that reason, we're gonna go ahead and put it into the F tier. Next up, we've got a brand new entry, which released here in the West in 2024. Throne in Liberty is brand new, making it one of the biggest MMOs out right now. It's light on PvE content, but has a heavy focus on PvP content. Unfortunately, if you combine that PvP focus with the fact that it's got significant pay to win, you've got the quintessential Korean MMO formula where they know the game is gonna die fast, but they are hoping to make enough money off the whales before it does to make it all worth it. The game peaked at an impressive 333,000 players, but it's already down to 74,000 players at the time of this video. The population size seems to be dwindling incredibly fast, and it doesn't look like it will be long before the population is below 50k and then below 30k and so on. Still, Throne in Liberty is one of the better, more polished MMOs available right now. It's free to play, and so it might be worth checking out if you're looking for a free to play PvP MMO, and you're okay with a bit of pay to win. But for me, the fact that this game launched in a state where the cash shop currency is the same currency you use in the auction house, so you're literally using cold hard cash to buy items in the auction house, in a brand new game in 2024, it just kind of ruined it for me, and it made it so that I was never going to be interested in it. And I think that's why we're seeing the player population bleed off as fast as we are. And so it saddens me to have to do this, but the best I can do for this brand new MMO is put it into the C tier. I just don't have an interest in fighting against somebody else's wallet. I could, but why bother when there's so many other MMOs that don't make me do that? So there we have it, guys. What do you guys think of the tier list? I just rated something like 39 MMOs. So I know you're going to disagree with me on some of them, and that's totally okay. It'd be kind of weird if I did this and we agreed on all 39 of them. Hopefully you're not too upset. These are just my opinions. They're not fact, right? It's just how I rate these types of games. And I might weigh the importance of some of these things very differently than you do. And that's totally fine. That's part of being human. And hopefully looking back on some of these great MMOs was as fun for you as it was for me. Thanks so much for watching, and a massive shout out to my YouTube channel members. And if you want to become a channel member for access to a private Discord channel or behind the scenes footage, click the join button down below or click the link in the description. Again, thanks so much for watching. Let me know which MMOs you would have rated higher or lower. I actually do read all of your guys' comments and take them into account when releasing next year's tier list video. So I'd love to hear what you have to say. And if you haven't started playing Raid yet, what are you waiting for? Click my link in the description or scan my QR code on screen to get insane bonuses available only via my link. Thanks so much for watching. If you're not sure what to do next, watch one of these videos popping up on screen right now, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.